Irakli Zirakashvili just tried the DEVON LARRATT pronation lift a few days ago, and to many people's surprise, he actually broke both Devon and Levon's record on this lift. But to almost no one's surprise, the technique he used is not quite perfect. In this video, we're going to talk about how impressive Irakli's lift is, as well as the implications of it. So first of all, let's take a look at the lift he did. Sounds like he managed to get as high as 77 kilograms on this lift, which is super good. That kind of weight on this lift is nearly unheard of, not even taking into consideration that Irakli is not a super heavyweight puller. Although he is smaller, Irakli is known for his bicep lifts, and he can probably lift more than the vast majority of super heavyweights on this style of lift. But obviously, his forearm angle is steeper than either Devon or Levon's. And it looked pretty bad when I first saw the lift, but after looking at it a bit closer, Irakli's forearm angle really isn't that bad. I do think it is steeper than Levon's or Devon's, but not by a huge margin. One thing about the Devon pronation lift is that even Devon doesn't normally start with a forearm angle that is exactly parallel to the floor. And I'm not entirely sure why he does that, but Devon is very intentional when it comes to his lifts, so I'm assuming there's a reason for this. But Devon's forearm angle is just slightly above parallel, where Irakli's is a bit more than that. Another thing that is interesting is the fact that Irakli actually curls the weight up instead of just lifting it statically by rocking his body backward, and this might account for his forearm angle looking steeper than it is in reality. Of course, Irakli's forearm angle is super steep by the end of the range of motion, but upon the very start of the lift, when he just begins to budge the weight, it isn't that bad. And I would assume that actively curling the weight is always going to be a bit more difficult than lifting it isometrically. However, I think that it would be even harder for him to simply lower his forearm angle a bit and not worry about actively flexing his elbow. Okay, now that we've got all the critiques out of the way, I do find this lift from Irakli to be super impressive. Irakli has always been head and shoulders above the competition when it comes to elbow flexor driven lifts, and this lift is no exception. I think that even if he perfectly mimicked Devon's form, he would still lift nearly as much as Devon has been lifting lately, and probably the pronation side of things would end up being the limiting factor for him instead of his elbow flexor. If Irakli did the same exact lift, but instead of looping the belt over his thumb, he looped it over his hand like a more classic back pressure lift, I bet he's hitting 70 to 80 kilograms even with a parallel forearm angle. And we've seen the strength that Irakli has prove to be extremely effective on the table, especially when it comes to preventing a hook. Back pressure is a lift that pretty much always helps you, but whenever you're trying to prevent your opponent from hooking you, that's where it really shines. When I think of someone who is nearly impossible to stop from forcing a hook, I think of Rustam Babayev. Whether Rustam was in his peak shape or not when the match took place, Irakli was able to prevent Rustam from setting the hook in most of the rounds, which is pretty much unheard of. When Irakli pulled Dadyikan, David ended up having to go outside in that match because Irakli had way too much back pressure to get forced into a hook, and David is normally an inside puller, but perhaps the best technical hook puller in the world at the moment is Evgeny Prudnik, and that's a match I would love to see for Irakli. I think that might be the very best test of how effective Irakli's back pressure is on the table, and also a very good test of whether or not forcing a hook is even a viable strategy at the elite level. If we were to see Prudnik able to force Irakli into a hook, I would be super impressed, but honestly, I think it's unlikely. I think that as the sport continues to progress, it's looking like forcing a hook on someone is going to become more and more rare as a go-to strategy for top pullers. We've already seen this in the super heavyweight category, where there are basically no hook-only pullers in that class, and it's making its way down to the lighter classes. Although I don't think that Irakli's back pressure and pronation is quite on the level of someone like Devon yet, it's only going to get better from here. Based off of what I'm seeing, Irakli is going to be pretty much unhookable very soon if he isn't already.